Today's been a wild day to start the week following some pretty crazy trade on the board Friday and today again. Talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing in the barn today.
Well, they call these cattle here today 20 to 40 lower, and that'd sure be what it would be. When starting out last Monday, I'd say we've lost $30 a hundred off the feeder cattle board, and so it's reflected in the market, and it's got everybody's attention. And they come out, the president says that we're going to get some beef from Argentina, and he's got some other quotes in there that things that would just kind of piss you off, if you know what I mean. He said, our cattlemen don't understand that he's the one that created the good market for us because of the tariffs, which was totally wrong. We got the least cattle we've had in 72, 3, 4 years. So, there's no more cattle than there ever was. In my opinion, on the market was pretty kind of top heavy anyway. We put like $30 a hundred on the feeder cattle board in 10 days, and we get to selling these things at all-time highs, and looks like there's never going to be a bad day. So in my opinion, it was a little top heavy, kind of wanted to correct itself anyway. And all it took was a little bit of something going on with the tariffs and with the president and a few of those things to actually take it down quicker than we might have been if that hadn't happened. But as far as I'm concerned, it was probably a little top heavy, and it had some correction in it anyway. So I think we might get the correction really quick here. As far as going back to the all-time highs that we've seen, we might get back there. It's probably going to take a little bit of time, but we don't got any more cattle than we had last week. So it's just the way the markets work. At some point, it gets top heavy, and when we sell off, or if it gets too cheap and we buy it back. It's just the way commodity markets work.
What are some of is there a difference in kind of attitude at the sale barn today compared to what it was a week ago or a couple of weeks ago?
Oh yeah, there's a lot different. Everybody was in there swinging with both hands, wanting to own these cattle, and you could see why when you had those fat cattle futures out there at 250, 60, and they weight steers are up there bringing 380, 390. The optimism is running very high. There's lots of feed in the country. There's lots of corn. There's going to be a lot of wheat pasture. Everybody's got feed. Feed's cheap, so we're going to try to capitalize on that because we can't get anything for our crops. So all the farmers are buying cattle, and everybody's in there swinging with both hands. And then the thing just turns around and plumb upside down. So today's a little bit leery of everybody thinking, what do we need to do now? As far as the market, though, actually, they bought them cattle pretty dang good today. We sell some 8-weight cattle up there at 340 or 45. Sell some 7-weight cattle up there at 360, 370. Them's pretty good prices. Everybody's going to play. Everybody's made a lot of money in the last year if they weren't hedged. And, they're going to buy some cattle back just because that they've been making money. If we was going through a time everybody been losing money, it'd be a total disaster. But that's not the case. So everybody's going to do some business. Everybody's going to buy some cattle. It just they're a little more cautious than they was.
Jackie, as you look ahead, knowing what the fundamentals are reflecting and what market should be doing, knowing that we don't have more cattle on hand, what is your outlook as you go into the rest of 2025 and looking into 2026?
Fundamentally, I think the cattle market's in really good shape. That box beef was kind of faltering. We put some back on the box beef in the last week or 10 days. As we get headed into some holiday demand that we're going to have off out here in December, just like we always have. Well, I don't think we got an overabundance of fat cattle, so I think we're going to if we can keep trading these fat cattle in that 240 range, 235, 240. These feeder cattle came lower, but everybody's going to keep buying cattle if they pencil there, because that's just we're going into the year. Everybody's going to need to buy some cattle because of tax reasons. If we get into next year, I think we got fewer cattle next year than we had this year. They're going to keep some heifers, barring a drought that got us in trouble over the years and made these cow numbers shrink dramatically. And so, barring a drought, next year fundamentally probably should have been better than this year. Whether that plays out to be, but as far as fundamentally, that's the way it looks.
Jackie, do you get concerned? There's conversations that the Minister of Agriculture from Mexico coming in about reopening that border. What does that mean for markets in general, but also thinking about that supply situation? Does that put some pressure um, on barns and sales as well?
Well, if you have to have some kind of a bearing on it, but here's the thing: I actually think, probably the thought of it happening, and when it happens, it's probably going to break the market The Mexican cattle, I'm sure there's some down there, and they're going to cross those cattle, and that's going to add to our numbers. But still, I think domestically, we'll be short enough of cattle domestically. And once we get past the thought of those cattle coming across, and we get them crossed and get them over here, probably once we get past that, we're back in good shape. I don't think there's enough numbers of them to break the market because we're going to be so short here in the U.S. But it's going to have an effect on the market short term. How long it lasts it's hard to see that. Here's the thing about commodity markets, though, and it's kind of like back there when corn was short and they said corn was going to $12 a bushel. Well, it only got to 8 on the board. That's the highest it ever got. The basis got really high, but the corn never reached that point. Well, it don't matter what commodity market is. At some point, it runs out of buyers. So when it runs out of buyers, it's going to correct itself. That's just the way they work. And, I don't care if there is cattle or not cattle. At some point, that's just as high as it's going to get. That's as high as the demand will allow, and that's just, we run out of players there. So at some point, that's the high. Where that is, I don't know. Have we seen it? I don't know that. We may go back and make new highs. I don't know, because it's just a lot of it has to do with the people that's trading the commodity markets and how they want to stay long or they want to get short. So we'll change the market dramatically. So we're kind of playing at everybody else's hands. It's we're probably better off if we don't get those 8-weight steers back to $4. And some of these calves at $5.50 and for a 5-weight steer and some of the things that were going on, we're probably better off if we don't get them back that high. If we just change in a range there that we can kind of pencil a break even on those cattle, we were better off to trade them there, because if it don't, we get a lot of people in trouble financially very quickly.